Okay, so today we are going to talk about source code management, which is called as SCM, source code management, which is also called as SCM. So in this, basically what is SCM is that we want developers to work parallelly on a code. So when the development happens, different developers, they work parallelly on a development of the functionality, and we should be able to basically store different versions of the code. So let's say if I have done some changes in a code, so I should be able to track those changes. The other developer should also be able to track it, right? His or her own changes. So that is what the version, basically where version controlling is, right? In short. Now, what are the different version controlling?
Can you just increase the size?
Yeah. So basically, what are the different version controlling systems we have? This is one of the task which we perform, and very important one. But the real important point for us is different version controlling systems. Now basically there are two types of version controlling system. One is centralized version controlling systems. Now what is centralized version controlling system? Like here, basically what happens is we have two machines. Okay, let me draw a diagram also. So this is the machine on which the developer is developing the code. Developer machine, right? Here he develops the code. And another system is where he keeps the code, I mean the version of the code. So this is a server where the repository of a code is created. So version control server, right? Now once the developer develops the code, he completes any implementation, then he unit tests it, and once he is satisfied, then he pushes the code. Now pushing is, in short, it's like uploading own version of the code to the server. This is called push operation. And there are two main operations which are push and pull. So pushing is where you upload the code from your own system to the version controlling server, and pulling is where you download the latest code from the version controlling server. So here these are centralized version controlling systems where you always need to be connected to the network in order to perform the version controlling, because the server resides somewhere, right? And then you as a developer need to be always connected to that, and then only you would be able to version control your code. This is centralized version controlling system. Now what are those systems? I mean, what are the different name of the version controlling systems which supports this model of centralized version controlling? One is TFS, Team Foundation Server. A well-known one, a TFS, and Virtual Source Ceph, VSS. So these are few systems which supports this. Now what is another type of a system we have? So we have distributed version controlling system, another type, right, which is the recent one comparatively. So distributed version controlling system. Now, how it is different than the centralized ones? Now let's understand. So you have a developer's machine. So here on a developer machine, you will have one system locally installed, okay, which will allow you to keep the versions of your source code locally also. And on a remote system, you will have a server version control server, and locally on your developer's machine. So this is the developer's machine. So on this machine also you will have the capabilities to keep the different versions of your source code. Now in this system, centralized, on locally you won't be able to keep the different versions. If you want to say check in your code as a new version, say, or your changes, you want to version control them, then you always need to push that code to the version controlling server. There only you can keep different versions of your source code. But in this type of systems, locally also you can do version controlling, and you can version control your source code using some remote server as well. So on both the ends you can do the version controlling, right, locally as well as remotely. Now this is where the Git fits in. Git is basically a system which allows you to version control your code in this model. So you can keep the different versions of your source code locally also and on remote server also, right? This is the Git here. Now we are going to understand Git now, how Git functions basically. So I would say example Git, and here the examples are these two. There are other also, but I have just mentioned these two. Now Git. Now what is Git basically? Git is a version controlling system, okay, which allows you to keep the different versions of your source code, as I said, on local systems as well as on remote. Now what is the remote now here? Remote means you have installed, or you have set up the server somewhere, and there you are keeping different versions of your source code. Your fellow developers are also collaborating the source code, and then ultimately the source code basically which gets created. So out of that you generates the build of your software, right? Now there comes, when it comes to the version controlling on a remote server, there comes GitHub and GitLab. Okay, now let me show you what is GitHub and GitLab. GitLab.
With Git, can we do local version control as well?
Yes, you can. That is the difference between this Git and TFS. GitHub. Then Azure Git. So all these are Git systems actually. Okay, these are all Git systems. So internally it uses Git. GitHub, GitLab, they just provide you a remote server. GitLab, for example, provides you just a remote server wherein you can create your repository and you can keep your source code there. Okay, so GitLab, GitHub is nothing different than Git. Git is a system, a version controlling system, whereas GitHub, GitLab, these only gives you a remote server where you can keep your source code, so that if your developers are spanned across different geographical locations, so they would be able to get the code and they would also be able to collaborate. If you keep the version controlling only on your system locally, then you would only be able to keep different versions of it. But if you want the fellow developers also to be able to collaborate and keep different versions, then definitely you need the version controlling system at some place from where everyone can access it, right? So that is where the GitHub and GitLab comes into the picture. Even Azure Git. So Azure Git also is nothing but a Git system which is provided on the Azure as one of the Azure service. Okay, it's nothing different than GitHub and GitLab. Only few, features here and there. But otherwise, all systems are pretty much identical in terms of usage. Okay. Now let's create a remote repository on GitLab. Let's use a GitLab, right, for our work. Okay, now you can basically register, on GitLab. Let me show you the registration process. You can go sign up. You can provide your first name, your last name, the username which you want. So let's say I want Pranodai D or Pranodai. Here the name and the password which you want. And then you have to just simply click on register. Okay. So once you register, it will send you the verification, the link to verify your email on the email ID you have mentioned over here. So you have to just click on that link to verify the email ID, and that is the simple account creation process. Now let me sign in my existing account. Yeah, so it has sent me the verification code. So let me get that verification code to complete the sign-in process. See, here I have got the code 025463. So I'll just go here 0. Sorry, I just lost it. 025463. So once I verify, my verification is successful. I'll just click on this. Now I am inside my repository. Now I already have few repositories created. In your case, this page would be blank. Okay. Now let's explore few things here on this particular platform, like how we can create different repositories and what are the different tabs or links here. So if you want to create a new project, I would click on this new project. New project is a new repository. So you can say create blank project. You can specify any name. So I would say DevOps batch 1, some name, right? Then here, this is very important point. This one, visibility level. If you define your repository as private, okay, private repository, then if you want any other person to be able to collaborate, then you need to add that person right here as a contributor. I'll show you that also, how to do that. But visibility level basically defines who can access your repository, who all can have access to it. And public repository is where without any authentication you can access this repository. That is the public repository. Now GitLab, now it is free to create the private repositories also on GitLab as well as on GitHub. But as I told you yesterday that on GitHub, just few years back, I think 3 or 4 years back, GitHub used to charge $7 a month for a private repository, whereas public repository creation was free there. So let's create a private repository, and I'll say create project. So see here, this is how I have created the repository. This is my repository. In this repository, I will push my code. Push means I'll upload my code. Okay. And let's see few things here. Now here on this button, you can see we have got two options. One is SSH. We will talk about the SSH authentication, and our regular username password authentication. Okay, so you get two URLs basically, depending upon how you would like to authenticate with your repository. If you want to authenticate with your repository with username and password, so you will use this HTTP link. If you want to authenticate with your repository using public private key pair, you will use this SSH authentication. Now let's scroll down a bit. Now here, let's scroll down. Okay, now let's see few other things on this. Now let's go to this members link. Now here you can see that currently I am the only person who can collaborate. I am the owner here, right? You can see the role. Now if I want to invite someone to collaborate into this repository, then I can invite the member. I can provide, let's say I want to invite anyone from you. So has anyone created the GitLab account? Anyone? Rameshri, Sampada?
Yes.
So if you can, then
Yes.
if you can share me your username so that I will show you how to invite a member, and then how can we control the collaboration which everyone can do.
Yeah. I can just type in my email address with which I created GitLab.
Yeah, sure. You can create, even if not only a single, even if all of you can also send me the links, or whatever the usernames you have. Okay, so I have got Sampadas. So I'll just put here. So this is what it is: Sampada Deshmukh, Sampada D. So I'll just select this. Now I can select a role which I want to assign Sampada. So let's say guest. So guest is the person who gets the minimum access. Like he would only be able to view the repository. Reporter is the person who cannot contribute into the code, but he can report the bugs. Developer, he can develop the code and he can basically collaborate. Maintainer has got few more rights as compared to developer. And owner is the person who owns the repository, who can delete and who can basically administer the entire repository. So I just assign developer role.
What are the main duties of maintainer? Like what tasks they can do?
So yeah, we can see like maintainer basically they have the rights to create the branches. They have the rights to, like, there are ways you can lock the branches. So wherein you do not want any developer to directly push his changes to the branch without having the review, right? So the maintainer has all those rights. So maintainer can push the code without having to have a review. So the maintainer has got the rights, all the rights related to creating the branch and locking the branch and all that stuff.
Okay.
And access expiration also we can provide, like when I want the access for a particular person to be expired. So let me add Sampada as a developer and let me invite. So as soon as I invite, the person will get the invitation link on his email ID. Okay, now let me take the Rameshri's email and invite Rameshri as well. Rameshri, I am not able to find you here.
You can just remove @Gmail. Maybe you will find the user. Yeah.
Okay. And then let me add Rameshri as maintainer. Let's invite. Right. So now I have added two people, one as a maintainer and one as a developer. Okay. Now let's go ahead. Now let me scroll down a bit and let's understand these settings. Yeah, settings, general settings. So here I can see the name of the project, then the visibility of the project also I can manage here. Now you can see here, if I just expand this, now you can see the currently project visibility is private. If I want to make it public, I can do it. Let's scroll down. Now here I can provide the permissions. So repository, view and edit files in this project. Then merge request, submit changes to be merged inside a branch. We will see what is merge. Fork, we will see what is fork also. Then let's scroll down and yeah, an important point is, yeah, that's fine. Let me save the change. Let me scroll down a bit. Yeah, okay. Now let's scroll up and see few other settings. If you click on this icon, which is called as avatar, if you click here and go to preferences, you will see few more settings here. So now these settings are very important for us as long as integrating it with Git is concerned. So let me access tokens. Now here, if you want to access this Git repository, okay, like you can access this or you can authenticate it with the help of username and password that is there. But instead of password, it would be always advisable to access it with the help of token. When we would be accessing it from our Jenkins, right? So our Jenkins is going to pull the source code from this repository. But Jenkins need the access rights, right? Because this repository is a private repository. Now in Jenkins, when I will configure the credential, if you guys remember, we had talked about something called credential there, right? So that credential, I can specify the username and password, obviously there. But instead of authenticating your repository with the help of username and password, it is always advisable to authenticate it with username and access token. So access token is nothing but a password only, but which is the password which you can delete if you wish to. Like if you feel like the password has been compromised, then you can delete that access token. Okay, but the password is something which we keep only for our personal use. We should not rather configure that password in any of the systems you want to integrate with your repository, right? So if you want to integrate your repository with any other systems and you want to authenticate, then instead of password, use access tokens. You can create an access token. I'll show you how to create it. See, add new token. I'll say token to access a repository from Jenkins, and I can specify the expiration date also here, right? I can specify the expiration date. This particular token which I am creating is valid for 1 month. You can see the date by default is September 28. So it will get expired after this. This is good practice. It's good practice to have your tokens expire at a regular interval of time and generate the new ones, so that if at all it gets compromised, so there won't be any unwanted access done to your repository. Now here you can specify which permissions you want to give to this token. So now we are creating a token for our Jenkins repository to pull the code, right? From our Jenkins, we are not going to push anything. We just want to pull it and build the perform the build activity. So I'll say, so you can see here there are different rights here. Grants complete read write access to the API. So this particular thing grants the entire access. Read, this gives only the read access. Read user grants read only access to the authenticated user's profile. So you can get the information about the users which have the access to the particular repository. Create runner grants create access to the runners. This is particularly when you are running the pipeline from the GitLab itself. Read repository grants read only access to the repositories on private projects using Git over HTTP or repository files API. So this is something which we need. We should be able to pull the code. Write repository is where you would be able to push the code, right? So we don't want write repository access for this token, and then we will create a personal access token. Now this is the token. You can see that token, but remember to copy this token and preserve it somewhere else, because once you leave the page, you won't be able to restore this token. You have to delete the token and regenerate the new one. Okay, so copy this and put it somewhere. Now this you can use as a password, as your password, right? Not from UI. When you would be logging in your repository from the UI of this, that time I'm not saying that you would be able to use it. But when you would be accessing your Git repository, right, from the command line or from while integrating it with some Jenkins or some systems, so there you would be able to provide this in place of your password. Now this is how we have generated the token. Another point, let's go to the email section here. Yeah, this is just few things that's not of much interest. Now the interesting point is this one, SSH keys. Now the authentication basically are of two types. Okay, one is basic authentication, which is done using username and password, simple. And another is SSH authentication. Now what is this SSH authentication? In this SSH authentication, basically you need to create, let me just put these things here in the Word file so that I can share this file with you. Here. Yeah, basically there are main two types of authentications. Basic authentication, right? So in this, user authenticates based on username and password. This is simple authentication technique. Another technique is SSH authentication. This is a very interesting point. In this SSH authentication, user authenticates using public key private key pair. So basically you can generate two keys. One is public key and one is the private key. So the private key is something which will reside on your system. Okay, let's say I want to connect to this repository from this system, my laptop. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll generate the key. So I'll show you how to generate the key. You have to go to command prompt and we have to use one command, SSH keygen, and hit enter. So once you hit the enter, what it says is, now it will generate two keys, a pair of two keys. One pair, one entity from that pair is public key and another entity is private key. Now what it says is, it says that enter the file in which to save the key. So by default it will create your keys in this location, in your user directory. This is my current user directory. Inside it there would be a .ssh folder which would be created, and inside that I will have this private key and public key pair generated. So I can provide some different location also. Let me provide some different location. So I would say I'll provide the location of our batch folder. So this is, let's say, the location where I want to generate my, or I'll create one more folder here. Let's not keep the files dangled over here. I'll say SSH keys, and inside this I'll provide this location so that my public and private key pair would be generated. Now it says that, okay, I'll say, so I just created the folder, so it is saying that the folder already exists, so that's fine. I'll say yes. So for extra security, if you want to mention any passphrase is nothing but a password to access the private key. So let's say if this private key, the private key always remains on your system, and if this private key gets compromised, let's say, then that person won't be able to access that private key if it doesn't know the password. So it's always good practice to provide the password also. But for now, let's keep the thing simple. I am not mentioning any password here. Enter same passphrase again. So if you had entered any passphrase here, then that same passphrase you need to enter again. As I had not entered any passphrase, I am going to just simply enter. Okay, so actually okay, I got it. So the problem is, so it considered that as a, let me create the keys again. Yeah, so let me do it in this way. Fine, let me generate, and I will provide, I'll just delete this folder for that matter. Yeah, and I will generate the key again. Yes, so my keys are generated, and let's have a look at those keys. So you can see here, these are the keys. Let me just move them to a new folder.
But previously, why we are getting that error?
Because there was a folder created with that name. That's why it was giving us the error.
Okay. So the folder should be of different name, right?
Yeah. So just a minute. Let me just. This. Okay. Let me give a name as keys, for example, and inside I'll put these keys. Now, if you see here, there are two files. One is the private key, and another one is the public key. Okay, so this key, let's see this. Now this is a private key. This will remain on your system from where you are trying to access the repository. So what will happen is, when you will try to access your repository, this key would be sent to your GitLab. Then GitLab will try to match this key with its pair, public key. And if the match is successful, then the access would be authenticated. Now the point is, where should then be this public key? So this public key should be added to your GitLab account. Okay. If you come here, SSH keys. Now let's say I want to give an access to Sampada now, because she has already been added as one of the member. Also Ramesh. Now I need to add their public keys here. So now what I'll do is, for now, I'll just add my own public key here so that the access would be authenticated. So I'll say add new key. And I have to paste the content of public key. Please understand, not of this private key. Private key would be on my system from where I am accessing my repository. I need to provide this one. So I'll just copy and put it here. And here also I can provide the expiration. The reason is, like, if let's say I want my particular user, so if his private key, even if it gets compromised, say once this public key expires, then he won't be able to access the repository with the same private key. This is some controlled measure you can take. Even if your private key gets compromised in the hands of some attacker, then he won't be able to access this after a certain period of time. So it's always good practice to provide the expiration, but for now, by default, you can see the access is valid up to 2024, so 1 year. Let's click on add key. Now I have added the key. Now if I want to authenticate now my access, then how to authenticate now, that is a very important point. So the first thing what we did is we generated the key pair. Once the key pair is generated, from that key pair, the public key we added into the SSH keys section, and the private key is with me here. Private key. This is my private key. Now we can authenticate and access to this with the help of this private key to our Git repository. We will see that, but let's move on for now and see few other things. So the main interesting things for us from this section is access tokens and SSH keys. This is something which we are going to use very frequently, right? Now let's go to the repositories. Now let's go to the, let me go to my, just a minute, home page. I'm on the home page now. Now you can search your repository from here with the help of its name. So here is my repository. Now let's scroll down, and now let's clone this repository. So what is clone? Now this is a repository which is created on the remote side. Now I do not have anything on my system from that repo. So what you need to do first is you need to clone the repository. You need to download the entire content of the repository on your system. So let's clone it for now with the help of HTTP, and then we will do it with the help of SSH. So let's copy this URL. Go to the directory where you want to clone your repository. So I'll just clone it here. I'm just starting a CMD, and I'll just enter a command called git clone, and I'll hit enter. So right now it is not asking me the username and password. I'll tell you why it is not asking me. But usually it asks. Okay, it says that gitlab.com. Okay, maybe there is some internet access error. Just a second. Let me just check what is the problem with this. Okay, it's not able to ping this. Why? There was a, okay, yes, there was a disconnection from my side. Okay, so that's why I was getting this error. Now I am able to ping. Exactly, that was the issue. So let me clone. Actually, for some time my network was dropped and I was not able to clone. It was saying that gitlab.com not able to resolve the host gitlab.com. It means it is not able to access the gitlab.com. So then I tried pinging it. So ping actually helps you to check if you are able to access a particular server or not. So I was not able to ping also because there was a drop. And I was wondering like why I was getting this error. But let's clone it now. See here, now it is asking me for username and password. Now here I need to provide my username and password. But on subsequent access it will not ask me. Okay, it says that access is denied. Okay, I think I had made a mistake in providing the password. Yes, so now I am able to clone. So if you go and check now here is my repository which has been cloned. So here I have my repository. I just have one file there readme and that has been cloned here. Now I was talking about that once I'll try to clone it again. Let's try to clone it again. Now this time it didn't ask me for my username and password, right? Now let's understand why. So you can go and check here on the Windows credentials. There is one section called Credential Manager, it is called as. So here in the Credential Managers, when you access your Git repository for very first time, then it prompts you to enter username and password. Once you enter it, it saves those credentials here in this Windows credentials. Now if I scroll down, you can see gitlab.com, you can see here modified today. It means my credentials are stored here. You can see my username and my password. So on subsequent access to the Git repository, it gets those credentials from a credential manager. Even Jenkins also, like Jenkins, if the Jenkins server is running here, no, and Jenkins server when it tries to access in the repository, if the credentials are already stored into the Windows credentials, then it doesn't give the error if you have not configured those credentials inside the Jenkins itself. Okay, now if I remove this credential now, let me remove this and let's try to clone it again. Now it will ask me the pop-up again. Here I need to again provide the credentials. Once I provide the credentials, those would be stored here again. Now I can provide, where I am providing the username, right? Password, right? I can provide the access token there. Let's see that. Let me remove the credential from the Windows Credential Manager. Otherwise it will not ask me for the pop-up. Let me delete this and let's close. Now here and now here I can provide the token. This is the token which I had generated. See, I am able to clone with that token also. So to access token is something which you can use in place of password. So instead of password, it is always better to basically use your access token. Now I can remove that access token anytime from there. Right, let me go and go to the preferences, access tokens. Now if I feel like my access token has been compromised now, so I can delete it. Just a minute, let me see where is the token. Yeah, so this is the token. Just now I had created, so I'll just delete this. Now if I try to access, let me remove it from here. Yeah, this GitLab. Let me remove it. Let's remove the folder and let's try to clone. And now if I provide that access token, it will not allow me the access. See, authentication failed, access denied. The provided password or token is incorrect is what it says, right? So it's always advisable to use access tokens in place of your passwords, right? So this is how we can create the access token. We will see how to access the Git with the help of SSH key, but just let's first understand and practice this method of access, that we can access the repository with the help of username, password and username or access token. And once you access, it stores your credentials in the Windows Credential Manager. Please remember. So if you are going to submit your system, let's say for any kind of maintenance or something, make sure to remove the credentials from this Windows Credential Manager, right?